Joining me now, Democratic strategist and former advisor to the Obama campaign, Amisha Cross, and Brendan Buck, MSNBC political analyst who previously served as press secretary to former VP candidate Paul Ryan. Good to see you two. Amisha, you first, because you were in the room for Trump's interview. First, tell us about the real-time reaction to it and explain why you posted on social media that it was a mistake for the conference to have Trump do this event. And what do you say to those who are saying, look, it was good to expose him for who he is?
Well, first off, thanks for having me. From being in the room, I can say this. There were gasps. There were audible jeers at some of his commentary, specifically when he attacked the vice president about her race. This is a room that is 98% black. Trump is used to speaking to rooms that are 98% white. So to walk into that room and to insult black people, to attack a black journalist and her network at the same time, and to have had such a stall. We're talking it was over an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. And I was sitting there hearing NABJ officials talk about how they were planning on releasing a statement, having that conversation with those of us who were in attendance, because many of us had been sitting in that room for 3 hours waiting for him to take the stage. And there was no conversation around when it would happen. But what we found out was that from the whispers in the room from NABJ officials, that it was he did not want to be live fact checked in any way, and that he was not going to take the stage if that was going to happen. So from start, it was rough and tumble. And within 30 seconds of the first question, which was literally a conversation that was basically a rundown of all the things that he said about black journalists, all the quotes that they have essentially around some of the negativity that he has targeted, specifically black women journalists, in addition to black-run cities and cities that are predominantly black. All of these things that have made black people not necessarily even give a Republican ticket a second look, because they recognize that the racism and vitriol that's coming from Donald Trump is real. And he didn't want to answer to his own quotes. And the way that that aggression came out within the first 20 seconds of him being asked that question, people started walking out of the room, literally. And the only reason I think we didn't have more that actually did was because there were some jeers back and forth, but the Secret Service was there to stop people from getting loud and rambunctious as well. In addition to that, be mindful, this is a journalism conference. So many of these individuals, they are being mindful of their employers and trying not to do anything that could instigate them not having a job the next day. But the questions and the comments in the room were largely around, one, why is he here at all? This is a journalism conference that has a theme of fighting disinformation. You have disinformation in chief speaking right now. I was in a row that was ahead of a student group. Those student journalists who are still in college were questioning why we have a disinformation theme and we have the king of disinformation up on the stage. It just didn't gel well at all, especially in a city like Chicago that Donald Trump has had nothing good to say about since before he ran for elected office. And again, in a room full of people that he does not speak to. His comments were not for a black audience at all. They were for the audience that he consistently talks to regularly, and he just wanted to insult black people at the same time.
I want to pick up on that with you, Brandon, because there's a Washington Post op-ed which states that this was not the audience Trump was aiming for. To Amisha's point, here's the quote. Trump was not speaking to them, but to a mega audience beyond the Hilton Chicago that loves mocking people of color. Does this further underscore the idea that Trump is not looking to necessarily grow his electorate, but instead keep giving his base what he always has? And will that have consequences?
So I think that's obviously what he ended up doing, and that's what his instinct is and what his gut is. I don't think that's what the plan was. I think the plan was built around, this was a campaign that said they were going to get a historic number of black votes this election, and they were going to completely change the coalition. And I think they went there because they thought that this would be an opportunity to do that. I think they went and did this when they thought they were still running against Joe Biden. He showed who he truly is, and so I don't think that was successful and all. And once he was challenged, he reverted to the same old Donald Trump, which is why I respectfully just completely disagree that he should not have had that platform. If you only allow Donald Trump to be heard in set speeches where he says, things that are on a teleprompter and only speaks to his preferred audience in Fox News interviews, the rest of the country isn't going to see who he really is. I think asking him questions and showing his true self is exactly what we should have. And I think we need to respect people enough to understand that they can know when he's lying. It's not a secret that Donald Trump is a liar. We give people this, we try to protect them so much I think when you show them who he is, that was a disaster of an event, an absolute disaster for him.
100% it was a disaster. But let me ask this to both of you, and I'll have you go first, Brendan. I mean, Trump's campaign said, cool, we're doing this. They made the decision to do this event. You would think they know their candidate and what he is capable of. It was a disaster. Why did they put him in that position?
Well, because he's a terrible candidate. That's why it ended up being that way. But they had a plan. And again, I imagine they thought this was a good idea when they were still running against Joe Biden, when everything was going well for them, and that they could, sort of breeze into changing the game. I think this is all the more reason why he should have more opportunities like this, when people realize that it's not just a stage-managed campaign, it's actually a person that you're talking about. And the more you see the person, you're reminded of who he is.
So, so Amisha, to you, though, the same thing about the campaign. They know who he is. They knew this would be an environment that he's not necessarily comfortable with. Why did they let him do this? I mean, I know the big picture that Brendan's making. Cool. But the campaign, really? They said green light this.
They know who he is, and they were playing to the MAGA war room base. Donald Trump likes to talk about black people in front of white audiences. He does not make a habit of talking about black people in front of black audiences. And he used the MAGA greatest hits when he walked up on that stage. But to counter something Brendan said a moment ago, this wasn't something that was decided when Joe Biden was still at the top of the ticket for the Democratic nominee. This was actually decided 2 days before NABJ started. Donald Trump had been invited months ago, and he had never said yes to it at all. He made that decision 2 months before, and all of the membership, we all got an email 2 nights before we were to fly to Chicago for NABJ to start. So this is not something that was planned really in advance. This is something that was planned because he saw that it was the day after he made the comments, the day after the big Atlanta event for Kamala Harris. He wanted to wipe her out of the news. He also wanted to wipe out all of the commentary around his own vice presidential nominee, who had all of the single cat lady comments that were running around. He wanted to create a different news cycle and a different conversation. This is not something that his campaign had always been planning to do. They have been invited to NABJ every time that he has been the Republican nominee. He has said no every single time. This is the only time he came, and he only decided to come at the very last minute.
So, Brandon, let's get into some of the polls, because they suddenly show Donald Trump losing ground in many swing states. What are you hearing among Republicans about that sudden erosion? And is there a sense that the backslide won't stop? I mean, for example, we have the latest Michigan poll from Bloomberg Morning Consult, which has neck and neck. It was neck and neck with Biden. It now shows Harris up by 11. Have you ever seen anything like it so quickly?
Well, I will say I'm skeptical of a poll that shows Harris leading by 11 in Michigan and losing by 4 in Pennsylvania. That's just not likely to happen. But what a lot of Republicans are saying is that map that we had gotten so used to, that the only states, swing states that were really in play for Biden, that blue wall, is a much bigger map now. I think people, I'm from the state of Georgia, talking to people down there, they absolutely think she can win Georgia. Arizona and Nevada, I think, are probably a little tougher, but they're absolutely in play. And so she has more paths to victory now. Before, it was really, you have to win Michigan, you have to win Wisconsin, you have to win Pennsylvania, and if you don't do that, you're going to lose. Now you could lose a Michigan or Wisconsin and win a Georgia and still get there. It makes for a very different race when you're trying to spend money in different places and appeal to different types of voters. But there's a lot of Republicans in a lot of places like the South that are pretty worried.